We're getting a 2-for-1 lecture tonight. We have two fantastic presenters that will be joining us, Dr. Dan McCarthy and Dr. Ken Lindemann. Dr. Dan McCarthy is a professor from Jacksonville University. He works in the Department of Biology and Marine Sciences, as well as the Marine Science Institute. He's a marine benthic ecologist with over 25 years of field and laboratory research experience. And his research focuses on the ecology and restoration of coastal reef and estuarine ecosystems. Our second speaker is going to be Dr. Ken Lindemann. Ken is a professor at Florida Institute of Technology in the Department of Ocean Engineering and Marine Sciences. Over the course of his career, Ken's work has focused on a wide variety of topics, including nearshore habitats and fishes, applied marine conservation, and coastal climate adaptation. With that, it is my greatest pleasure to welcome to the stage Dr. Dan McCarthy.
Thank you, Zach, for that nice introduction. Looks like you have an interesting series kind of lined up for this year. I would also like to thank those that are here in attendance. We appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to hear what we have to say. Okay. So this presentation, or the bulk of what we're going to be talking about today, is based on a book that me and my co-authors have recently published. It's called Islands in the Sand: The Ecology and Management of Nearshore Hardbottom Reefs of East Florida. So that's along with Dr. Ken Lindemann, who you'll be hearing from on the second half of this presentation, and then also David Snyder and Karen Holloway Atkins. This book, it describes the biological and the physical and the management attributes of these reefs, okay? And if you have any experience with these reefs, you realize that they're highly dynamic, okay? For the most part, what we're gonna be talking about are shallow water systems where there's a lot of wave energy and sand movement. And, you know, for the most part, we're on the reefs, but these reefs lie along a coast that has a lot of sandy shores as well, okay? And the reefs are really patches, you know, amongst these sand barrens for the most part, and harbor a high diversity of marine organisms, okay? So hence, that's where the name comes from, Islands in the Sand. Okay. So to be clear about what we're referring to when we're referring to nearshore reefs, you can divide the reefs that occur along the East Coast into the following categories, okay? So you have Nearshore Hardbottom Reef, or NHR, which is from 0 to 12 feet. And that includes the intertidal zone too. So if you recall, and if you see this photograph from marine land, that an intertidal zone is an area that is covered up during high tide, but it's exposed during low tide. So in this photograph in marine land, you're seeing a rocky zone that during low tide, and all of that's covered up, you know, by water, okay? So it includes that, but it also includes kind of shallow hard bottom area up to 12 feet, okay? Now the next zone is the intermediate hard bottom reefs, or IHR, and this is 12 to 30 feet depth. And then beyond 30 feet, we refer to what's called Offshore Hardbottom Reefs, or OHR, okay? And really the focus of today's presentation is going to be on this nearshore hardbottom reef. And we may sometimes call it nearshore reefs, but I want you to be aware of that's what we're talking about. And sometimes we'll talk about connections between this reef area and other reef areas as well. So where do these reefs come from, okay? The basis of this reef is really non-living limestone, okay? And you know, the zone that we're talking about is going from just south of St. Augustine in the marine land area all the way down to the northern part of the Miami-Dade County, okay? And we're focused on coastal shallow water reefs, okay, that occur in this zone. And if you look in this map, you know, you're seeing different colors that represent the different kind of limestone, where it was formed or how it was formed. And primarily, the limestone that we see along the coast is derived from lithified or solidified Anastasia shell rock, or sometimes referred to as coquina rock. That was formed kind of in the range of like 114,000 to 125,000 years ago, or 120 is a good ballpark single figure, okay? But evidence suggests that Miami limestone that came about around the same time period mixes with much younger Holocene ridges or limestone. And by much younger, we're talking about 10,000 years approximately. So this mixing occurs roughly at the border of Palm Beach and Broward counties and southward into Miami-Dade County. Okay, so, I think what you should be taking out of, this is that it's complex, basically. We have limestone forming at different times and maybe different ways. There's still a lot that we need to learn about it. Now, notice in this photograph that, what's depicted here by these colors often, goes inland a little bit. And, a lot of this occurs under the sediment, that you live on. And there are places along US 1 that you can stop and see limestone formations that are either in an estuarine environment. So this photograph shows the Indian River Lagoon, and it shows limestone in the Indian River Lagoon. You can go further south to Coconut Grove in the Miami-Dade area and see some of this as well. So ultimately, this limestone can form habitat, not just for coastal areas, but estuarine areas, as well as terrestrial areas. Okay. So that limestone forms the foundation of the organisms that live, out on, these reefs. Okay, I think a common theme that you're going to hear, not only from me, but also Dr. Lindeman, is because we're in shallow water, these nearshore reefs are exposed to high surf and a lot of sand movement that makes them very dynamic systems where, often parts of these reefs are covered, by sand. And this is a natural part, of the ecosystem. So these aerial photographs gives you a feel for the amount of change that can occur, okay? So this comes from the Singer Island area in Palm Beach County. And if you look at 2003 and kind of follow my cursor, those red areas represent kind of mapped out hard bottom, okay, along the coast. Now compare that to a few years later, 2007, that you see that there's more of that red/orangish writing there, which means that there's more hard bottom or more reef, okay? And in this case, roughly 3 times as much, okay? And, if you look at the coast, it's very challenging to get a good evaluation of the aerial extent of these reefs, because there are some areas, that they're somewhat persistent, okay? And then there are some areas that maybe change on the order of years. And then other areas that could change on the order, of weeks, depending on the intensity of storm activity and associated waves. So, if you have this habitat that's changing, and such, exactly what is the value of it? So, what are the values of nearshore hard bottom reefs? So, in terms of biodiversity, there are many species that are found on these reefs. We've accumulated a list of over 1,100 species. This includes turtles, many fish, invertebrates, and algal species. And there's probably more, okay, than that. And many of these species, you can find in more tropical areas like the Florida Keys, okay? Now, many of these species, they kind of come in from the outside. So if you didn't know, many invertebrates and some fish, for example, as well, they produce babies in the water column. These babies called larvae that will drift in the water column, and then they settle out in areas and metamorphose, and then potentially stay in the same area or potentially move on. okay? But many of these associated animals may move and interact with other ecosystems, such as deeper offshore reefs, okay? And clearly, this is a photograph showing some diversity with respects to fish, but very clearly turtles move around a lot, okay? And that's a premier example of turtles utilizing these habitats, but then going to other systems, sometimes very far away. So the other way that you can look at the value, of course, is what's the value to humans, okay? So if you look at the photograph in the upper left, this is Stewart in your backyard, bathtub reef, and look at the line of that reef. They can function just like coral reefs do as a barrier to reduce the energy associated wave activity, and in this respect, reduce the amount of coastal erosion. So they have very high value in that respect. Okay. Another thing is recreational fishing. So people that know these reefs, can fish for them. You see these fishermen standing on top of the reef fishing. People catch snook, red drum, sheep's head, among others, on these reefs. So people have a lot of fun with that. Probably don't need to tell you what you're seeing here are spiny lobsters, okay? I have to point out this photograph comes from a local from that area. He's passed on now, but his name is Doc Hibson. And this photograph is from the 1940s. Okay, and look at those lobsters. It shows that people back then were using these reefs, for the organisms that are on there and the food resources. Maybe some of you may know the late Mike Bladis from the Vero Beach area, and those are also some nice lobster. Okay. These reefs have value for snorkeling out on the deeper sections of it, scuba, but you really don't even have to get in the water. You can watch the birds associated with these reefs. There is a photography outside of the water, but inside the water too, as well as intertidal exploration. So the goals for today is one, we're going to take a focused look at the ecology of the animals and plants that make up these shallow water reefs. Two, we're going to talk a little bit about the conservation and management of these important ecosystems. And then three, share with you a little bit what we feel are the future research directions that should be taken to better understand and conserve these nearshore reefs. So let's get back to that Limestone Foundation, okay? As I'm sure that you're aware of, there are living things that are growing on it and are attached to it, okay? Some of the organisms that are attached to it actually help enhance it, and they can enhance the shelter that's available to other organisms, and they can make the reef bigger, essentially. I think most people know that species such as corals, if you have an area that's highly developed with living corals, they add to the reef and provide shelter. But sponges do that, well. And certainly, our more local worm rock, or also known as a worm reef, does that as well. When you have species that can allow for shelter for other species like small invertebrates or small fish, they can protect them from predation, they can protect them from environmental stress. When you have species like this, we refer to them as foundation species. So we believe these are foundation species. Now, macroalgae can serve this purpose as well. Okay, so these are some photographs showing some of the more fleshy algae. In this case, we have a hairy blenny taking refuge in some macroalgae. You get a good view of it, and it adds to the three-dimensional aspect of this reefs. If you think about kelp forest, for example, that's a brown, several species of brown algae that make a unique ecosystem. Now, this is not as extensive as that, but on a smaller scale, it does provide shelter to organisms that's important. Now, another important aspect of macroalgae is that they function as a major source of energy for these nearshore reefs. So they photosynthesize, and take energy for the sun, and then that's transferred by the animals that eat the macroalgae, to other animals. Okay. So this is a nearshore reef food web that we've put together, and I'm going to walk you through one part of it just to illustrate, the point that I'm trying to make. If you start here with the red square over benthic algae and cyanobacteria, so these are the photosynthesizers, right? That are present on the reef, and various organisms feed on them. So herbivores, of course. Green turtles, various types of fish, including doctorfish, silver porgies, chubs, parrotfish, among others. But you also have a number of crabs, shrimp, and sea urchins, and various worms such as polychaetes that will feed on them too. If you go from here to here, then there are organisms that will take that energy and eat, from these benthic invertebrates, such as small carnivores. And for the most part, we're talking about fish. And then there's other larger organisms that will take that energy and, they're transferred at very, very low percentages as you go up the trophic pyramid. But, the point is that the energy is having an effect throughout the food web. Okay, and that's why one of the reasons macroalgae is important. For the sake of being complete, there are other sources of energy that contribute to the system. Organically rich detritus can be sifted, and organisms will get energy out of that. There's also sort of the microscopic plants basically within the water. And so we refer to this as phytoplankton that provide energy. The energy pathway there is that there's microscopic animals that are called zooplankton that will feed on them, and then they're in turn fed on planktivores, for the most part fish, but also sessile invertebrates. And then the energy again goes all the way to sort of the larger carnivores, or sometimes referred to as the apex predators. Okay, so a little bit about macroalgae. Major evolutionary groups include red, green, brown, and blue-green algae. In our synthesis, we uncovered over 300 species of these algae. So pretty diverse, okay? And, again, they aid in nutrient cycling that occurs on the coast. They provide oxygen, into the ecosystem, food and shelter for numerous fish, invertebrates, and turtles, and in particular, green turtles. So I know this may sound weird, but I love algae. I just think that it's beautiful. If you look at it close, the range of sizes and colors is really impressive to me. From an ecological standpoint, you should be aware, that there's different shapes of it, and there are these categories that you see from sheet, filamentous, coarsely branched, thick, leathery, jointed calcareous, crustose, coralline. So some are low lying, some are more branching. Some even make limestone, and they contribute to the foundation or the structure of the reef. You can imagine that any of these branching forms can provide shelter for organisms. So that's really the take-home point here. Some other aspects of algae that you should be aware of are these two. So a lot of times as ecologists, we're referring to turf algae. And turf algae is low-lying algae. So it's relatively short, and people have different definitions of it. But for example, it could be roughly 1 centimeter in total height. And it really doesn't refer to one species of algae, but usually several species of algae. And sometimes some of the very, very small sessile invertebrates as well. And it's very almost spongy for the most part. And you're seeing the examples here in this photograph here and this photograph. It can help retain sediment on the reef. Also, again, provides shelter for very small, mostly invertebrates like small crabs, brittle stars, and such. And it's significant to know because a lot of times nearshore reefs and even further south in the more well-developed coral reefs, there's a high percentage of the reef that's actually made up of turf algae, okay? Now, the other kind of algae, blue-green algae, really, we don't really know a lot about it, on the coast. And most of the time when we talk about blue-green algae, we're talking about kinds of blue-green algae that can take advantage of the right environmental factors and then bloom very rapidly, either on the benthos or on the seafloor bottom, like you see with this particular blue-green algae. It's actually overgrowing in macroalgae, okay? And that, one that you may have heard of is kind of sometimes referred to as the Green River, that occurs in estuarine environments there, I know, in St. Lucie, but also up where I'm at in the St. Johns River, okay? An interesting thing to me, in some cases, when you have the formation of limestone, and the photographs in the lower right come from marine land, the darker streaks that you see here in the upper intertidal zone are various types of very, very low-lying cyanobacteria. And you see that not just in our areas, but also in other temperate rocky intertidal, kind of the upper parts of the rocky intertidal zone. Okay. So a little bit on some general trends in terms of distribution and abundance, and a little bit about reproduction. I'd like to preface this with saying that, or reminding you that when you look at the range that we're talking about, from just south of St. Augustine down to the Miami-Dade area, the environment changes a lot. Down in the south area, more semi-tropical. In the north area, somewhat more temperate. You have various aspects of the environment in terms of seawater temperature, exposure to wave activity. And as you see here, the Gulf Stream, which is pretty close in Palm Beach, but gets much further, by the time, further off the coast by the time you get even to St. Lucie Inlet. So these are environmental factors that are changing along the coast. So you would expect to see different things along the coast. And where we can, we're trying to highlight that. One of the things we have observed is that there's basically a higher volume or biomass of algae to the north than there is to the south. Okay, so there's more of that fleshy, branchy stuff that I was talking about to the north. Further south, there's a higher percentage of that turf algae that I just talked about. And there's a lot of diversity on the life history and reproduction, of algae. They have the capability of reproducing sexually by producing essentially male and female spores that unite and drift downstream, but then also asexually via several means, where they can fragment and then, colonize areas very rapidly. There are species that can live for several years, so just like land plants that are perennial, but then there are other species that live for a much shorter time. It can be considered annual. So very dynamic in terms of the life history and reproduction, of algae. Okay. So as we move on, we move to the invertebrates. These are animals without backbones, and for the purposes of this presentation, I think it's necessary to break them up into sessile or non-motile invertebrates. These include anything that's attached to the reef, just like the algae that I was talking about. So these are the corals and sponges, worm rock, bivalves, barnacles, and tunicates, among others. And again, to remind you that several of these, including the coral, sponges, and worm rock, can be very significant in enhancing shelter to the limestone base that occurs on these reefs. Okay. Then there are the organisms that can be associated, with these shelter enhancing species. These can include crabs, shrimp, lobsters, snails, worms, squid, octopi, sea urchins, and sea stars, among others. And some of these, it says motile. They may, when the larvae come into an area and metamorphose, they become young adults, and they may live their whole life not really moving around too much. Some of them, might move around more. There's definitely more information that we need to have, on that. Okay. So, as I'd mentioned before, shelter enhancing invertebrates that we have along the coast, include, a pretty high diversity of sponge species, as well as coral species. Generally, the abundance and diversity of these increases as you go further to the south. Okay, further to the south, in the Broward County area, we have stands of, or areas, I should say, of the threatened Acropora species, the staghorn and elkhorn species that, have been listed, basically. Okay. Along a large percentage, of the coast, we can have areas that have a lot of, what's referred to as worm rock or worm reef. In this photograph that's also bathtub, which is looking to the south, you can see the limestone there where that girl's playing, sort of that's the older stuff. That brown stuff, for the most part, is that turf algae that I was talking about. Look how much of that, occupies the reef. And then these mound, honeycomb structures, are these worm rock areas where are literally thousands of worms that have stuck together sediment, to form these mounds that can add several feet in a given area, several vertical feet, of shelter. And, latitudinally, in terms of changing as we go from like Brevard County to Miami-Dade, again, these are the trends that we see with these foundation species that enhance shelter. So high algal biomass more to the north, okay, St. Lucie to Brevard. Generally, highest worm reef biomass from sort of the Indian River to Palm Beach County area, although you can find worm rock really throughout the range, as well as algae, of course. And then generally the highest coral and sponge diversity more to the south, although again, there are representatives of corals and sponges throughout the range. Okay. From a depth standpoint, remember that the shallows are highly affected by wave activity and sand movement, particularly in the east central coast of Florida. In the intertidal zone area, worm rock, they're also referred to as sabolarids, which comes from their family name, Sabolaridae, is most abundant in the intertidal zone, but pretty abundant within the zone that we're covering, which is NHR, up to about 12 feet. And, in this shallow subtidal area, you see sponges and corals too, but generally become a little bit more abundant, when you get greater than 12 feet. So I wanted to say a little bit about worm rock, or more correctly said, Sabolaridae. These are, worms in this family. And there's over 100 species, and they're representatives found throughout the world. There are extensive worm reefs of a different species, of course, found on the northern coast of France, found in Southwest, England, found in Brazil as well. What we have on the east coast of Florida is one species, although there's been a little confusion on what exactly to call it, okay? It's been called by 3 different things. It's probably been most represented in the literature by Phragmatopoma lapidosa, but there's evidence that it might ought to be referred to as caudata. But if you ever look at it in papers or literature, right now as it stands, we're considering them the same thing. I always use the same name for this particular species. This species is very opportunistic. They reproduce very well and they grow out very well. Okay, so they can, and they seem to thrive very well in somewhat disturbed habitats. So like a lot of invertebrates, they put their gametes in the water and they produce larvae that drift around in the water column. These larvae might be drifting in the water column anywhere from 2 to 20 weeks before they settle to the seafloor bottom. They need some kind of hard substrate to settle on. And like a lot of invertebrate and fish larvae, when they kind of settle and metamorphose, they're looking for environmental cues that tells them that that's going to be a good place to live, right? So they like to settle with others, okay, and that kind of fits if they're going to form a mound, okay? And, you know, I hope that you can take from this presentation that, you know, if they're settling by the thousands in an area, they then can grow out very quickly. After settling in metamorphosis, we believe that we know that they can produce gametes roughly a month after. That's very quick for them to start producing gametes. I mean, a lot of organisms like sharks, for example, take years, you know, to be ready to reproduce, basically. But these guys can reproduce within a few months for sure. Okay, and then they can also add sediment to their tubes very quickly. So if you're looking at the left here, these are sediment grains, and you know they like to put things together in a certain way, so it's very organized. In the laboratory where they're giving, you know, copious amounts of sediment, I've had them grow nearly 1 centimeter in a 24-hour period. Think about that, 1 centimeter. You know, maybe the diameter of your finger, depending on how big your finger is. So they're able to add to a reef area very, very quickly. Again, unlike corals that generally create their skeletons at a very, very slow rate. So this is a close-up of the honeycomb structure formed, you know, by these reefs. Okay, and from the research I and a few others have done, it suggests that the life cycles of these worm reefs is annual. Basically, it doesn't appear that most of the individual worms live beyond 1 year, certainly not 2 years, although they maintain, because of their great reproductive capabilities, the reef for a long period of time. So if you start out with a limestone area like you see here, okay, and then what we've observed is basically in the fall and early winter, and you're going to see some months here. Just recognize that it can change a little bit. So it's just rough times of the year. But, you know, roughly the fall, you know, time period, you have peak recruitment occurring where the larvae come in and they settle on cracks and crevices. They prefer smaller sediment sizes, which tend to be darker. And again, they settle in the thousands in just, you know, we'll say, 4 by 4 inch square area, literally can have thousands of individuals. And then they grow out at that rapid rate that I was talking about, adding structure to the reef. And they continue to grow out, but in some cases, like you see this mound in the center, they grow out like a mushroom and they grow too big, right? And then they become susceptible to wave activity. In some cases, they may grow out where they're getting less splash from the surf, and individuals in the mound die from desiccation. You know, in this time period, you start to see recruitment of other organisms like crabs and sea urchins, and they start boring holes into it, and it makes a reef that's topographically more complex. Okay, and it, you know, also, as I point out here, sand covering can affect it as well. But you know, it's this time of the reef, you see a lot of juvenile fish, juvenile invertebrates. So I mean, the shelter is really important to many other organisms. And then, interestingly, before it all goes completely, a fall recruitment pulse comes about again and helps to restore it, and the cycle starts all over again. And in research that we've done, we've looked at chunks of the mounds, and we have found a wide range of invertebrates and sometimes small fish that live within this. Every photograph that you see here is a different species of really what's almost, overall, along the coast in terms of invertebrates, including sessile and motile invertebrates, around at 600 species, or a little over 600 species. Roughly half of them, you know, are motile ones, like these crabs and shrimps and sea urchins, okay? It's likely many of these guys live and die, you know, once they, you know, settle out there. I mean, look at this individual on the right. This particular small crab is carrying eggs, so it's ready to contribute offspring somewhere downstream, right? Now, of course, when we talk about connections to neighboring areas, you know, that's a big area that we would like to learn more, you know, and a lot of the invertebrates, again, probably stay very local, but some not. The only places that I have seen the chains of spiny lobsters walking from shallow to deep has been in these nearshore reef areas. And certainly it happens in other areas, but you know, there's definitely evidence that some of the larger crustaceans may move around a little bit. Okay, so more research needs to be done on that. Now, an organism that definitely moves around a lot, are the sea turtles. And along our shallow water reef areas, we have representation from all 5 sea turtles. We're highlighting here the 4 main ones. These are the loggerheads, the green turtles, hawksbill, and Kemp's Ridley as the main ones that we see there, because they seem to have more of a connection. But, we do see the leatherbacks come in too, but, again, they're more offshore, and more pelagic really in their adult existence, except for nesting. Okay, so there's increasing and fairly strong evidence that nearshore reefs are important habitats for juvenile and subadult life stages of sea turtles found throughout the east coast of Florida. In particular, this is the case with green sea turtles, but also hawksbill as well. Okay, so these are turtles that they may have hatched out, or obviously hatched out from somewhere, spent some time offshore where they're feeding on algae and small invertebrates associated with flotsam, and then coming back still young and taking advantage of the food resources, either algae or invertebrates that are found on these nearshore reefs, as well as the shelter available to allow them to either rest or take refuge from predators. Okay, so when you look at turtles, basically 2 things can happen as they grow up, basically. So all are generally omnivorous when they're smaller. Okay, but then as they grow, either their feeding emphasis becomes being an herbivore. Okay, or it may be more carnivorous, and sometimes in work done by Karen Holloway Atkins, my co-author, and a few others, we find a mix of things. Okay, but in this first category, omnivorous to herbivores, I'll focus on green turtles, and then as they become subadults and juveniles, it appears their physiology allows them to hold their breath more and stay down deeper for a longer period of time, so that they can take advantage of resources. And with the green turtles, of this age category, they are feeding on algae for the most part. Sometimes other things are found in their guts, but feeding on algae. So very important for them. The other turtles, and this is the hawksbill, Kemp's Ridley, and the loggerheads, are at this later stage feeding on invertebrates for the most part, although Karen tells me that hawksbill have also fed on macroalgae too. So in the case of hawksbill, they seem to be more specialized, and a premier thing that they're feeding on are sponges. Okay, but they're also feeding on tunicates sometimes, as well as corals and algae. Okay, loggerheads, which tend to use somewhat deeper areas in the nearshore reefs, particularly for resting, are feeding on mollusks and crustaceans. And the Kemp's Ridley, which really there needs to be a lot more done, and really I don't believe that there's no information on what they're feeding on the East Coast. What we speculate is based on information done in other areas like the Gulf of Mexico. But it seems like they feed a lot on the swimming crabs. So this is a family of crabs called portunids, which includes blue crabs as well. Okay. So it's a little bit about their feeding. So, other ways that they're utilizing these reefs, of course, is taking shelter, either to rest like loggerheads may do out in deeper waters, or refuge from predation. So on the right there, you're seeing, a ledge, and they can go pretty far under these ledges, if they need to. Okay. Now, I'm going to finish this section just by saying the dynamics of turtles using the East Coast nearshore hardbottom habitats are very dynamic, and very interesting. you have turtles like, the green turtles and the hawksbill, like I mentioned, using food resources and these nearshore reefs, all right? And, virtually all the turtles are using nearshore reefs as a corridor, as a pathway to lay their eggs up on the beach, okay? And interestingly, from some various research that's been done, it's found that many of the nesting loggerheads and greens may not necessarily be the same ones using the nearshore hard-bottom reefs. So they're coming from different areas, and there's evidence that suggests, like loggerheads, for example, that we see in our coast, may come from as far north as North Carolina and far south as the dry tortugas. And when it comes to the other species.
Hi, thank you.
I'm almost finished, Ken. The other species, they are like the greens and the hawksbills. It's within the hemisphere, so we're being visited by turtles from all over the place. So in essence, the nearshore reefs are important on a very large scale, and I believe a very important part of the puzzle, in terms of the management, of turtle species. Okay, and at that point, I'm going to turn you over to Dr. Ken Lindemann, who will talk about fish, among other things.
Hi, thank you, Dan. I'm just pulling up this screen share right now. So I'll finish this talk focusing on fishes, management issues, and some related things, and then take it into a Q&A session at the end. Hopefully we'll be joined by the other two authors of this book. In short, there are over 260 species from over 70 families now recorded from nearshore reef habitats from Greenland to North Miami. The most species-rich families are the wrasses and parrotfishes with over 26 species, jacks with 17, all the way down to grunts with 7. There's many other families. These are the most species-rich. And yes, pictures are coming. The most abundant individual species are hairy blenny, silver porgy, black margate, sergeant major, cocoa damselfish, sailor's choice. We want to emphasize that many of the fishes on these reefs are not known at all to most folks, even folks that may know these reefs somewhat. This montage is from chapter 5 in the book, put together by David Snyder, and it shows the extraordinary diversity of life operating at very small scales on these habitats. These are what are called cryptobenthic fish species, including blennies of different types, as well as jawfish. These nearshore reefs are spawning sites for over 30 different species of fishes, primarily these cryptobenthic species, but also some damselfishes. So this image on the bottom left from David Snyder, all of the images without credits are from authors of the book. This is, of course, a sergeant major, and this purple material here are eggs, which they guard quite aggressively, as divers know. This image over here on the right shows a hairy blenny male in spawning coloration with, appropriately, a female nearby. Many species are commonly represented by post-larval or juvenile stages. This image right here shows an example of this, and this again is something that you don't see typically, even if you're knowledgeable with these systems. In this case, we've got the newly settled, immediately out of the plankton, sailor's choice newly settled stages. You can see these tiny little fishes here. They're approximately 10 millimeters, about the size of your fingernail, and largely transparent when they settle. Then you also have sailor's choice early juveniles as they grow out. Here's an early juvenile porkfish, very yellow, iconic on reefs as adults. And here is one lone early juvenile of the smallmouth grunt. One of the points here is that there are extreme taxonomic challenges in identifying fishes when they settle from many families on these reefs. And there's a lot of additional work that could be done with settlement recruitment patterns on these systems. Now, depending on the species and the location and other factors, NHRs may also function as nursery habitat. Diverse species on NHR are sought by anglers and are managed by federal and state fishery agencies based on the potential value as a nearshore habitat to snappers, grunts, and groupers. These reefs have been federally designated as an essential fish habitat. That was from 1998. This is an example of a cyanid, a drum from the Worm Rock off of Satellite Beach, Florida. This is an example of Spanish mackerel on approximately 15-foot hard bottom off of Peck's Lake. Many of you in the Stewart area, I hope you've had the opportunity to fish the extraordinary Spanish mackerel aggregation that occurs out there. That's over a hard bottom reef system. That's a very special place at Peck's Lake that integrates into shallow water as nearshore hard bottom as well. In addition, there are many other species that are fished for in these habitats. This is a picture from further north in the habitat where you have a lot more turbidity frequently. This is actually a pretty good day from Brevard County. You've got here a gray snapper. This is taken off of Hangers Beach, off of Patrick Air Force Base. Gray snapper, sheep's head, and in the distance there you can see, despite the turbidity, a very sizable black margate. So management of nearshore reefs is something we could spend a lot of time on, but in short, primary human impacts occur from their burial by large quantities of sediments, fill, that are imported to widen beaches. Fill projects typically involve the excavation and dumping of 300,000 to 1 million or more cubic yards of sediments per project, very large and complex engineering projects. Fill projects can also subject deeper reef systems to elevated levels of sedimentation and turbidity. These images by David Snyder are from 1995 off of Jupiter, Florida, a dredge and fill project with turbidity clouds. This is an active cutterhead dredge. There are pipes running from the dredge to a beach further out here where the sediments are somewhat, you could describe it somewhat as being vacuumed and dug out of the bottom and then transported by huge machine engines on these large vessels via pipes to the beach. The fill here in this picture is being blown onto the beach through a series of pipes. You can see the fill blowing onto the beach, exiting this pipe and exiting this pipe from the active cutterhead dredge in the background. When these construction projects occur, there are dump crews working on the beach with a variety of equipment that allows them to create these dikes or berms and then push the sediment literally over the reef as the beach is widened with the fill. There are a variety of potential sublethal as well as lethal effects on these organisms when their habitat is buried. Chapter 8 in the book focuses on a variety of these management issues, and this table is an example of all of the different, not all, but a variety of the different physiological and behavioral responses that can be elicited from burial that can degrade the survivability of a variety of species, both those that are attached and those even that can move. Individuals of almost all macroalgae and invertebrates attached to nearshore reefs undergo mortality within several days after their habitats are buried. They can't escape. There is a literature that documents this for the Phragmatophroma worms, as well as primarily the Phragmatophroma worms, but also some other species. This is also the case for over 30 species of cryptic fishes. Extensive burial can end reproductive outputs from these habitats for as long as they are buried. Indirect impacts on more mobile species are not well known, especially on the sensitive larval and juvenile stages. Impacts on algae and turtle feeding are also not well known. And further complicating this, as we've indicated before, these are high dynamic environments that have natural burial of the reefs that can occur as well. Not typically as large as in a fill project, but there certainly are natural impacts as well. And part of the management challenges are in teasing out the relative impacts of the natural sediment dynamics along with these massive fill projects where an entire reef system can be buried. One of the ways of managing this array of challenges involves using artificial reefs as mitigation for the impacts. In the book, we examine attributes of structure and placement of artificial reefs for mitigation. We don't have time to unpack that here. Definitely enhanced monitoring studies can improve the measurement and performance of our efforts to compensate for habitat loss in these systems. This image from chapter 8 in the book shows some of the artificial reef systems that have been used. Traditionally, large mitigation reef boulders. Some of the challenges with these systems is that these boulders can often sink into the bottom quite rapidly or be displaced by storms, including hurricanes. In Brevard County, artificial reefs have been put in recently in association with a fill project that involve articulated mats with coquina rock integrated onto the surface. These reefs are really quite interesting. They so far, with in some cases well over a year of placement, have not sunk into the bottom, as has often been seen in further to the south and in the past with these rock boulder systems. This does not show the actual full complexity and size of these articulated mat reefs, something that a lot of folks are interested in looking at further. So key findings and research opportunities in the book are summarized in chapter 9. The nearshore reefs function as shelter, feeding, and reproductive habitat for over 1,150 species from marine land south of St. Augustine to North Miami. Recall that the study area of this project was terminated in North Miami. There is substantial latitudinal variation in the distribution of these organisms, as Dan referred to earlier. Due to the levels of natural shallow water dynamics, this is technically considered to be a disturbance-mediated system. The organisms are adapted for a highly dynamic physical system. There are diverse inflows and outflows of propagules and nutrients, which suggest the possibility of semi-continuous larval connectivity among these reefs and other habitats in the system. These are just a few of the primary findings. Chapter 9 is loaded with findings that are collated by organism groups and management. So at the scale of individuals or at the scale of entire assemblages, these habitats are quite understudied. There's a variety of research opportunities which are laid out in a variety of organism-specific sections in chapter 9 of the book. Some of the research opportunities that we identified for this presentation include the need to identify the roles of nearshore reefs in terms of connectivity across the shelf. There's a need to detail juvenile and adult movements through telemetric tagging. There's a lot of potential here. There's a need for biophysical studies of larval transport to better understand connectivity along the coast. This could be especially important for foundation species such as worm rock. There's a real need to quantify feeding relationships in important species. We saw a slide earlier about the trophic food web ecology. A lot of this is based on assumptions or limited empirical data. Another thing to point out is that the birds that use shorelines, and if you spend much time on beaches, you know that there's a wide diversity of birds that do use these habitats. They feed heavily in some of these systems, and there's very, very little known quantitatively about this. Research is needed on multiple issues associated with ocean heating and other aspects of climate change for many organisms using these habitats. There are many, many comments about this and suggested research opportunities in the management chapter 9. The value of placing mitigation reefs before these reefs are buried should be examined further. We recommend that quite highly in the book, and we would hope that over time there would be some empirical studies of this. We also need to design mitigation reefs that resist burial. And as indicated, the reefs referred to earlier in Brevard may be a real advance in that direction. More information is needed on the details of mitigation reef structure and how that can attract or deter sea turtles. Many more findings and research needs are in the book. In speaking about early life history stages of organisms that use nearshore hard bottom, it's important to point out that early stages of humans use these reefs when they're available in sublime but potentially profound ways for their own development. These reefs are important to humans in additional ways. More research on social and economic values can aid future management. Importantly, over 100 people contributed to these efforts. This is a screenshot of the acknowledgement section in the book. We tried to acknowledge all in the book, and we wanted to note some of the most important reviewers here. These are the folks that are underlined. Very, very valuable review comments from experts on a variety of disciplines. We really appreciate it. We want to apologize to anyone who we didn't have time to recognize further. We think we got almost everybody. We also want to thank our spouses for their patience with the project that took 8 to 12 years, depending on how you measured it. So at this point in time, we're going to transition to a question and answer section. Thank you for your patience as we went through this. This is just beginning to scratch the surface on a 9-chapter book with a glossary and almost 100 images, and goodness knows how many pages of tables breaking down and unpacking the technical complexity of these systems. So as we go to the Q&A, I'd like to introduce, and hopefully they'll be able to dial in. We had some technical issues early. It wasn't FOS's fault. They've been wonderful. I'd like to introduce the other co-authors. That would be Dr. Karen Holloway Atkins of East Coast Biologists, who was the lead on all of the algae work and the turtle work, and just contributed extraordinarily to this document. And also to David Snyder, senior scientist at Continental Shelf Associates in Stewart, whose knowledge of the fishes of these systems is probably unparalleled. And he's an extraordinary photographer and highly published as well, as you can see from the quality of these images. By the way, this image is from, that you're seeing right here is from Mike Daniel from Brevard County. And with that, I'll hand it over to Zach. Thank you.
Well, most importantly, thank you. We've learned so much tonight. I know I picked up quite a bit. Both Ken and Dan, I can't thank you enough for being a part of our lecture series. If we were at the Blake Library tonight, I can assure you that our guests would be giving you a roaring applause right now. And I do see that we have both David and Karen on board with us. Karen, if you want to unmute your microphone, if we have any questions for you guys, we can certainly have you chime in. So I appreciate, again, everybody hanging out with us for the last hour, and there are some questions starting to filter in. If anybody has any additional questions you'd like to add, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box. I know some of you started asking questions early in tonight's presentation. Some of those questions may have been answered. I will do my best to kind of skip through these to make sure we're not repeating anything that Ken or Dan have already addressed. First question I see, I think I know the answer to, but are the 1,100 species you mentioned outlined in the book?
I'll take that. Yes, they are. We have tables basically that list every one.
Fantastic. Somebody asked a question, how small are they? But they didn't say what they are. So if that individual would like to type in a little more detail, we could definitely let you know how small they are, but I'm not sure which part of the talk that was about. So we'll come back to that one. Can you talk a little bit about some of the scientific research that's going on, specifically looking at the impacts of renourishment projects in Brevard County? I know there's probably a lot of academic interest in this topic, and maybe if you could just give a quick overview of some of the science that's going on, looking at the impacts of the beach renourishment work. I know that's, you know, an hour-long conversation in and of itself, but if you could give just a quick overview, I think that would probably satisfy a couple of different questions that we have.
I can take that. You hear me all right?
Loud and clear, David.
Yeah. I've been working for, I've been monitoring the natural reefs up there since, well, geez, goes all the way back to almost '05. But we formally started monitoring prior to the beach project in 2013, doing annual quantitative photography, and fish censusing is problematic, as really almost anything you do visually up there is problematic, because it's almost always turbid. It's very difficult to work in, but when you get a few good days in the summer, you can sample a number of areas like I do, and I do repeated sampling on transects, hard-bottom transects up and down the mid-reach area. And in 2017, when they deployed the first reefs, we monitored those first. In 2019, we started using baited underwater cameras to do to try for fish censusing. And that's been reasonably successful. It's fine out the artificial reefs, the water's clear, but on the nearshore hard bottom, it's okay. And it makes for a good comparable data set. But anyway, so I have a before after control impact layout right now. That may change depending on where the sand gets deposited in next year's beach nourishment project. But and those nearshore data are also very much comparable to the artificial reef data. And I'm actually working on some of that as we speak. I'm in quarantine in Guam right now. So I've got time.
David's joining us from halfway around the world. This is one of the advantages of
tomorrow.
using a virtual format.
Yeah, it's tomorrow right now, 9 o'clock or 10:30 in the morning tomorrow. Anyway, so we have a pretty reasonable data set again of epibiota from quantitative photography, both before and after the project. Sand was deposited on the beach in 2019, in part of the area, about 350,000 or so cubic yards of sand up and down the Brevard mid-reach up to the Patrick Air Force area, and that's where they stopped. I have my reference area right now is in Patrick Air Force base property, where the hard bottom goes all the way up through there. And I'm not sure what's going to happen there in the future here this winter. In fact, maybe as we speak, they're planning to nourish that area as well. And that will take care of my reference area. But anyway, that's what we have. It's pretty basic epibiota and fishes data from that area.
All right, so one of our guests has a question about the artificial reefs that are being used in Brevard to remediate the damage that's caused by the beach renourishment project. And they had a question about the specific substrate that the Army Corps is using to build those reefs. Possibly that material might not necessarily be an attractive surface for sabolarid worms or algae to grow on. Can anybody comment on how those artificial reefs are doing as far as meeting their intended goals?
Actually, I've been studying the turtles on those, and I actually popped in just this past week on those reefs, and meant to tell Dan that there was plenty of worm reef on the or worms growing on the worm reef. So the structure of those reefs is such that they put down a special fabric, because there was great concern that since there's no hard surface underneath the sand, that these reefs would just sink, which I'm assuming that's what their question is they're going to, the person asking in the chat is asking about them sinking. But the design also is made to where that it curves underneath, and so it kind of supports itself. The engineering in it is pretty neat, and we haven't seen this done in other places. So there was a lot of thought. David and I were consulted a lot with what do you think is going to help attract fishes? What do you think is going to help attract invertebrates, sea turtles? It's a very unique mitigation reef that hasn't been constructed before. I don't know if you want to add to that, David, but.
Well, Yeah, just to be clear, and I think maybe if the question was regarding the substrate material on the surface of the reef, the photo that Ken showed was a prototype, but nevertheless, what we did was, or what we had them do was take native Anastasia limestone with the material that the natural hard bottom's made from, and actually embed blocks of that into the wet concrete, that the concrete matrix that these mats are made from, so that there would be a natural substrate anyway. Probably the biggest differential though is the water depth. They're out in between 15 and 19 feet of water. But thus far, we haven't had, Karen, I'm glad to hear that there's some worm rock. As far as my photographic sampling with randomly placed photos on these things, which are 60 by 100 feet mats, roughly. And there's 39 of them, roughly, up and down the coast, about a 7-mile stretch. But anyway, thus far, macroalgae has colonized them pretty well. But you get that sort of classic fouling assemblage of tunicates and boring sponges and turf algae. Really quickly, we got on there. We've got sea whips, lots of urchins. There's lots of organisms have colonized the reefs since they've gone in, but they aren't right now. I wouldn't call them converging ecologically towards the natural hard bottom yet. That may take time, but again, they're very productive, and they're totally covered with organisms. But when I do just basic similarity comparisons with the similar data I have from the natural hard bottom, it's not an exact or even a reasonable facsimile yet, but I could see it changing probably every year as we survey. I think that's important
to emphasize for folks, that the mitigation reefs in almost all of these projects up and down the coast from Miami north are, by definition, they have to be in deeper water. And for those of you who know the coast, 15 to 20 feet is a different system in some ways, certainly, than 10 to 0 feet. And so you can have a lot of organisms on a deeper reef, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're replacing the same ecological functions. And as this work continues, that will be one of the things that will be unpacked further. And David already provided some detail on that.
All right, well, I'm gonna keep moving through the questions. We actually have quite a few questions in the queue, and I wanna make sure we get to as many of them as possible. Here's an interesting question about Sabolarid worm population dynamics. The guest wonders whether the entire population of Sabolarid worms along the east coast of Florida is homogeneous, or are there distinct subpopulations that have formed? And I have kind of a follow-up question to that. When you talk about these worm reefs, you mentioned that the larval worms have a planktonic phase where they drift away from the reef, and then obviously they find their way back. Is there any other mechanism for reproduction that skips that larval phase? When you look at a worm reef, oftentimes what starts out as a small mound of worm rock gets larger and larger and larger over time. I'm assuming that the larvae find their way back to that spot using chemical cues, but is there some other method that allows a small piece of worm rock to get bigger and bigger over time? But don't skip the population question that led to that.
All right. So in terms of the population, subpopulation, if I'm understanding the question, correctly, so we've done some unpublished genetic work that suggests. So we looked at 6 locations along the coast. Boynton Beach was the furthest south, and Brevard, Satellite Beach and Brevard was the furthest north. And right around just north of Bathtub was kind of the central location. We found that it was pretty homogeneous for all 4 of the 5, but the one that seemed to separate out a little bit was the one there at Bathtub Reef, essentially. And, I don't know why that is, in terms of the larvae, as I think, a number of people probably know, we don't know exactly how far they go, right? And so we did some work, with these 5 populations, but then also some in the Caribbean, and it suggested that, there was a lot of connection among them. But again, there's a little bit of a separation with bathtub that's very interesting to me. So I don't know what's going on, a combination of kind of the local currents there and larval behavior, but, with a lot of invertebrate larvae, they settle somewhere downstream from the parents. In terms of mechanisms for retention, from some work that I've done and some that Joe Pollack did, I think there's suggestions that once the larvae are born, or early in their phase in the plankton, that they are probably deeper in the water column. At least laboratory work suggests that they're photonegative, so they're probably kind of hunkering down in deeper water. So that might limit how far they go. And maybe there's some mechanism that occurs, again, in the bathtub area that results in that. I don't know. It's an area that needs to be looked at. But no, I mean, other than that, they are free spawning invertebrates and that sexually reproduce. There's no evidence that I'm aware of that they can, actively retain individuals.
Great. And now speaking of bathtub, we had several questions about human activities like swimming, snorkeling, fishing, and how those may affect the health of Sabolarid reefs like bathtub. We talked a lot about things that are negatively impacting the reef, but specifically we have a few attendees who would like to know how the actions of bathers and beach users are affecting bathtub.
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind with me on that is people stepping on the intertidal portion of the reef, So I think it's best that people try not to step on it because you can break it, and that kind of physical disturbance enhances the disturbance that's occurring to the reef. And, if it's too excessive, and sometimes there can be a lot of people, out on the beach, if they're out on the reef, obviously that's detrimental to the reef.
All right, switching gears a little bit, we had several people ask questions about your book. Would you please tell everyone how they can purchase your book if they'd like to?
Well, you can search Springer Press, Islands in the Sand, maybe type in one of the author names and it'll come up, all right? And you can purchase it online.
Great. So we talked a lot about different impacts on these nearshore reefs. Can you talk a little bit about the impacts of nutrient pollution on our nearshore hard bottoms?
That I'm going to refer to my co-authors. Ken, would you like to take that?
Sure. That's a very good question. There's obviously a lot of concern about nutrient overloading both in the lagoon and in the nearshore coastal ocean. You don't hear about that issue as much in the nearshore coastal ocean. As with many ecological and organismal scale and population scale and management questions, we don't have a lot of information, ironically, on that issue with our nearshore reefs in the system. However, for example, Dr. Peter Brill up here in Brevard County did some work published in a rigorous journal in 2004 where he documented, as I recall, I haven't looked at the paper in a long time, but he documented algal populations on nearshore reefs that the presence of those populations could indeed be correlated with nutrients from, I believe, sewage treatment plants on the barrier island. An excellent question, one which we definitely need more research on.
All right, fantastic. We got a follow-up to our original question of how small are they? I had a feeling this is what the question was about. It's the worms, the Sabolarid worm. So how big is an adult Phragmatopoma worm?
All right, so an adult worm can be a little over an inch in total length, but their diameter, just imagine kind of the diameter of a pencil, maybe a quarter to half the diameter of a pencil. So they're pretty small, and that's as adults. The larvae, when they're settling, are imagine they're about 500 microns, something like that. So you can consider that half the size of a typical pinhead, something like that. So very, very small, but the adults around an inch. in total.
Great. And I think at some point we talked a little bit about the lifespan of the worms, but can you remind us again how long they live, and do they continue building worm reef throughout their lifespan?
In my experience, they are continually reworking the outer edges of their tubes and often adding to it, you know, and I believe in the field, they are doing that until they die. But I think, you know, by the late summer, I believe adults are getting kind of stressed out because of heat, and certainly those that are intertidal. So they might not be working quite as fast. And then I think, you know, when the incoming cohort of recruits comes in the fall, they can't fight them off basically, and they're covered over. There's been times that I've seen, you know, cross section of a worm mound, and you see the layer. You know, you see the adults underneath, and then the layer of juveniles kind of just carpet completely over them. You know, so from that and other lines of research that I've done, you know, I believe that, you know, the individual worms, you know, probably most of them perish in 1 year, certainly by 2 years, for sure.
All right, let's go from biology to geology. Is there a continuous band of nearshore hard-bottom reef from North Miami all the way to St. Augustine, or are there gaps? And then is that reef ecosystem present south of North Miami? Do they extend all the way up the East Coast? And then kind of a separate but related question, do we have nearshore hard bottom in the Gulf of Mexico side of Florida?
So I'll let Ken take
a shot at that one if you want, Dan.
Yep.
Sure. So our study area in this book, as I believe was mentioned in the beginning, is from the northern boundary of Miami-Dade County, which is quite extensive north to south. So do they extend continuously from North Miami-Dade County all the way up to south of St. Augustine marine land? The answer is a definite no. These reefs occur in a distribution that scientists would call patchy. They, on top of that, with a patchy underlying presence, they're also subject to all of the sediment dynamics. We're pretty sure that in Volusia County, north of Brevard, but south of marine land, there's no evidence we're aware of nearshore hard-bottom reefs in that county. There are certainly stretches of other counties where you don't find nearshore hard-bottom reefs. There are stretches of other counties where you do. So they have a discontinuous distribution from North Miami all the way up to marine land. To the south, which was not in the study area of the book, you get into a different geological system, particularly when you go south of Soldier Key in Dade County, where you are in Miami limestone and then you go into a Key limestone environment. So the short answer is there's a lot of nearshore hard bottom to the south of North Miami-Dade all the way through the Florida Keys. You can stop and pull over on US 1 in many sites along the Florida Keys and snorkel out on rocky, shallow water reef systems, not with abundant corals, of course. This is in very shallow depths. So generically, nearshore hard bottom occurs not only through the Keys, it occurs broadly throughout the greater Caribbean and in some very extensive formations in Brazil and also globally, where they're often called rocky intertidal systems, as well as the west coast of the United States. In San Diego, there's federal protection for rocky intertidal habitats. Regarding their occurrence in the Gulf of Mexico, David can help us with that.
Oh, David is still muted. You might have to unmute yourself, David.
Sorry, it wouldn't stay up. And we talked about this a lot when we were working on the book. After we had kind of painstakingly, we thought it was simple. Anastasia limestone was the primary underlying geological formation for most of the, nearshore hard-bottom reefs that we were covering in the book, and that transitioned into this Miami limestone with overlying Holocene ridges here on the East Coast. On the West Coast, I can't tell you the geological formation, but there is extensive but patchy nearshore hard bottom that's very similar to what we get over here. It's rocky, you know, paleo shorelines, whatever you want to call it, indurated sand dunes. Venice, Florida, Sarasota County off Naples, up all around Pinellas, and even a little bit north, I believe, of Tampa, there's some. And there's a little bit in the Panhandle, the Big Bend. I can't tell you for sure. That's a whole different sort of an ecosystem that's even got seagrass in it. But simply, there is quite a bit of nearshore hardbottom on the West Coast. I've worked over there a little bit, particularly in the, like I say, the Sarasota area. I don't know the geology enough to tell you what that formation is. I don't believe it's the Anastasia. Best we could tell on that map we showed, the Anastasia formation goes somewhere to the kind of the center of the state at its furthest. So I'm not sure what the outcrop is on the West Coast.
All righty, everyone. Well, we are coming up on 8 o'clock, and so that's going to be our final question for the evening. Again, I want to wholeheartedly thank Ken and Dan for giving up their evening tonight to speak with all of us, and certainly David and Karen for joining in for the Q&A session. I hope all of you had a nice evening tonight. I want to remind you that 1 week from tonight, we have our next lecture with Dr. Larae Simpson, Director of Scientific Research from Florida Oceanographic Society. This is going to be a really fascinating story about how something as stable as a mangrove tree can, as a population, make a march in response to climate change. The trees themselves aren't marching, but the population is shifting as Earth's climate warms a little bit. So we'll see you again next week. If you haven't registered for our next lecture, please stop by our website and make sure you sign up, and we'll send you a link to join us at 6:30 next Tuesday evening. Thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our pleasure.